fora. They're supposed to be places where both parties sort of facilitates discussion between the two parties. It facilitates working out on problems as opposed to sort of court-like agreements. Okay. I think regardless of who gets this answer correct, I'll pass it around like a chocolates again, just to get everybody's sugar level back up. What is the largest World Bank funded project to date? Is it less than 1 billion? Is it 1 to 2 billion, 2 to 3 billion, 3 to 4 billion, or greater than 4 billion?
Can I find a friend?
Okay, so let's see a show of hands for A. Show of hands for B. C. D. E. Okay, as far as I know, the answer is D. It was 3.9 billion. It went to fund a 90% of it. Well, let me take it back. 80% of it went to fund a coal-fired power plant in South Africa, Eskom, and 10% went to fund the railroad lines to bring the coal in, and the other 10% went to build a wind power generator as well. There was actually quite a significant inspection panel case related to this. I had a lot more detail in my original presentation, but just a couple highlights that highlight a couple of things. The first is that one of the things that by the way, this was brought by an NGO on behalf of two NGOs on behalf of the locally affected people in South Africa, whose names remain confidential as well. But one of the claims was that the World Bank didn't follow its own sort of general statements that it supported reductions in greenhouse gases. And the inspection panel said, no, that's not within our realm to consider. So that highlights the fact that they can only look at the World Bank policies. There's quite a bit of controversy, too, around how much there's a World Bank policy or procedure that says that you can not ignore, but you can satisfy some of the World Bank policy requirements if there is something comparable in the whole country that achieves substantially the same. I don't know if all those words have been defined or not, and I'm not sure those are the exact words, but basically, if the management feels that the local countries do a good job in their home countries monitoring this stuff, they don't have to do it again. Okay, and so in this particular case, they said they relied on South African policies to too great an extent, and so they found them sort of in violation. This is all at the inspection panel. Now, did you want to say anything on that? No?
I mean, because uniquely we have this link into EU rules, that we apply, we are required to ensure that the bank have applied any applicable EU standards within the whole sort of environmental key of community law. The EBRD's safeguard policies are unique and are quite sort of stand out in terms of being supported by a comprehensive corpus of environmental rules, many of which are among the highest standards applicable anywhere in the world. So the greenhouse gas issue here would not have arisen. If you like, you would certainly have requirements and standards that you could have found, or assume that you might quite easily have been able to check against for non-compliance by the project, even going down to this idea of, you would have to justify what was international best practice as against, but that's not extremely difficult to do when you can go back to detailed policy documents and everything else. So there are those differences between the mechanisms.
Yeah. No, I think in the EU is a different situation in that respect because of the laws that are there.
Yeah.
I just a second. I want to get my notes here and read you what the eventual outcome of this case was, because this is where everybody will be a little bit disappointed, I'm sure. So basically what happened is the inspection panel, and the way the process works is the inspection panel receives the communication from whoever it is that's making communication. It's forwarded on to the management. Management has a chance to respond. Of course, management comes back and says, we did everything correctly. And then the inspection panel sort of evaluates both sides and then issues a report up to the board. and then it's up to the board to figure out how to do anything with it. And so basically, the only thing that came out of this case, even though the inspection panel decided that the bank management didn't do all that they should have, and I'll just read what I've written here, but the board discussion, this is at the board level, so this is the only thing that resulted from the board discussion focused on proactive actions to address potential future impacts to air, water, and community services identified in the panel report through mitigation and monitoring measures by the South African authorities with the support and cooperation of bank management. So when you get right down to it, that's not a whole lot. Basically, we'll leave it to management to make sure that maybe something could happen in the future if things maybe don't get better. So there's lots of qualifiers in there. I did want to mention one case at the World Bank, and I think it's important because it does show that these do have some teeth sometimes. This took place in Cambodia a few years back, and Cambodia decided what they wanted to do was they wanted to formalize their property laws. And so the World Bank actually funded a project and promised Cambodia, are you familiar with this? Cambodia $34 million to reform their legal system so they would recognize property rights. Well, everybody in this room probably already knew what was going to happen, but what in fact happened is the government used the money to fund a project that just overrode, I guess, property, what's called property, land grab, I think is the term that's used. And they're using it just to roll over local properties rights. And a complaint was filed with the inspection panel. And one of the complaints was that not only was the land grab, but there was forced the relocation of people. And what the inspection panel said was, well, the management came back and they said, well, we didn't realize that people were being relocated. We didn't realize this was being happening. We complied with our policies, and we'll go talk to Cambodia again. And so they went to talk to Cambodia and say, we've got these policies, guys. We need you to provide this, this, and this. And Cambodia said, well, we're not going to give you this, this, and this. And so the World Bank said, okay. So they cut off the funding. So they can have some teeth. Whether that helped the people, in Cambodia, I don't know. Whether it stopped the land grab, don't know. But at least the World Bank wasn't funding it. So they can have some impact on what's going on. Oh, sorry, just one more point. So when you talk about $4 billion, or close to $4 billion, these are big, big projects. I mean, you can imagine the impact it's going to be having. So while it's not a perfect solution for bank-funded projects, these are usually high-impact things. So it's worth the trouble to try to do something. Okay, I'm going to move on to voluntary corporate initiatives. So a couple of people saw my buddy from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and you've probably seen the names flashed all around. They're the biggest private sponsor of the Congress that we're attending today. They represent 200 members, including Shell and Nestle. But they have 200 members, and what percentage of the global GDP do you think the 200 members represent? I'll give you a hint. It may not be as high as you would expect, but okay. Let's see a show of hands for 1%, 10%, 25%, 50%, 75%. The survey says, okay, it's 10%. But I think that probably understates dramatically the impact that they have. Because, it's the Shells of the world, it's the Nestle's of the world, their transboundary impact is just significant. If you exclude all the sort of moms and pop shops, people, producing in the local neighborhood and selling to their neighbors, those do not have the impact that this 10% of the world's, economy, 10% has. I read another statistic, and I don't have it at hand, but I think a company like Exxon has global turnover greater than the GDP of all the countries in the world, except for maybe 25 or 30 or something like that. So while people may not be happy with working with the companies, if you can get the company, if you can get the Shell to change its practice, then I think you've accomplished a whole lot. It may not be satisfactory to the individual project. Let's see what the next slide is. Okay, so some of the voluntary corporate initiatives we've looked at, and you guys may be familiar with these, but I think there's a lot of mileage in these. I don't think we as advocates for the environment or advocates for the rights of people have exploited these enough. My personal feeling, like I said, is you got to get these you got to hold these companies accountable for what they say. These are not perfect; they're voluntary. So it's very hard to get any damages, but I think we can use them. So we've got the Equator Principles, which was signed up by a lot of the global banks in terms of their project financing, that they agreed, at least on a voluntary basis, to follow certain rules. The next one is the Principles for Responsible Investment. So if you've got companies that are investing and taking major shareholdings, they've agreed to a certain set of principles. The EITI, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, which is supposed to give a little bit more transparency to their activities. I mentioned the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. When you join these organizations, you subscribe to a series of policies or principles. You say, our company agrees to follow these principles. And if they don't, they should certainly be held accountable. At least brought to everybody's attention, and whether they blossom into something else, hard to say. But and then the Global Compact. Let me just say this about the Global Compact. They brought a claim that there was a group of NGOs that went to the Global Compact office, and that's who monitors the Global Compact seal. Because for a company to join the Global Compact, they have to sign up to a very specific set of principles. I think there's 6,000 companies that signed up for the Global Compact. The Global Compact brand, if you will, is managed by the Global Compact office. And if you sign up to the Global Compact, then I think you get to use that little seal right there. And so, of course, the Shells of the world put that little seal on their annual reports, and they talk about being members of the Global Compact, and we subscribe to these kind of things, and all the principles that the Global Compact says. And when in fact they don't, then you can bring that to the attention of the Global Compact office. And the Global Compact office, of course, their job is not to adjudicate, but their job is to communicate and to work out a solution. And I know, in fact, that there was a huge, NGOs brought a huge complaint against Nestle for its use of water throughout the world. And as you notice, I don't know if Nestle was the last Congress or not, but they're certainly here this time. So they're at least conscious of these kind of things. They're out there, at least trying to sell that they've changed. My feeling is they have changed. The problem with all these things is you really can't quantify it. It doesn't. The people that are immediately impacted, you can't show them an immediate result. But these things do have some sort of impact. Okay, next slide. Yes?
Could I just add, one that you haven't included is the OECD Code of Corporate Conduct, I think. But it does have national contact points, which have a sort of semi-enforcement role and have been reasonably effective in some jurisdictions. Okay,
and so that brings us to the other. I've got the World Trade Organization in there. I've got, actually, it was one of my favorite cases when I was studying this stuff. It's a cool case about the TEDs. Does anybody know what TEDs are? Territorial Excluded License. I thought it was a great name. But I won't go into that too much in the interest of time. And I've got others there. It's the World Trade Organization. So if you go to the next slide, I've got a list, and these others have come up. Most of them have come up just in my conversations over the last 5 days. Things that you might consider if you've got a local problem. These are international fora that you might be able to use. WTO is a little bit difficult. It requires state-on-state parties, but there's been some recent activity in the WTO that allows NGOs and affected people to submit amicus curiae briefs on behalf of the parties. In the past, it was unclear that the original ruling came out and said you could only do that. You could always do that if it was attached to a country's official submission, but a party couldn't give it to an NGO couldn't give it to the WTO and consider its trading impact. The first ruling came out and said no, you don't have to take them. A second ruling came out and said the panel that reviews this stuff said that you can accept them, but you don't have to do anything with them. So you have to accept them, but you don't have to consider them. And there was a recent case, I think it came out in the spring, where it showed that the panel who was reviewing all these things actually looked at the NGO submissions, and they used them in grilling some of the parties to the action. So increasingly, they're becoming important sort of elements. The OECD, we already talked about a little bit. That's right there. ILO section 169. Did I get that section number right? I haven't looked at this in the ILO convention 169. Sorry. Okay, but I guess there's some things in it. Have you looked at that at all? Did you say anything on it? Or?
Oh, no, what, on this particular?
Yeah.
No, I don't have it memorized. I'm sorry.
No, I was curious.
It's a human rights
Yeah.
instrument. It's the first human rights instrument specifically
Yeah.
addressing indigenous people's
Yeah.
issues.
But it's found in the ILO,
That's,
and it's been signed off, I think, by 20 parties. Is that right?
I don't know how many. It's
17 or 19. Okay, so less than 20. I guess the idea, and just to put this all back into perspective, the reason I'm discussing all these things, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's lots of tools out there. These may be the tools that fit a specific situation. I don't think any of them's going to specifically fit a situation. They're not going to be adequately, completely fit a situation, but they may be used. We learned a little bit in our discussions yesterday that apparently shareholders' actions in Canada, so you can hold Canadian companies that may be, I guess, quite often in mining activities, timber activities, they're very active. You may be able to buy a share and go to Canada and sue the company as a shareholder for those activities in forest jurisdictions. Shareholder actions broadly, they're claiming that they subscribe to the Global Compact in their annual reports, and they're not. That might be a shareholder action. That could in fact be false advertising. Could do lots of things with that. It was raised that in the OAS Charter, that's the Organization of American States Charter, there's actually some language in there that suggests that you can actually hold corporate actors liable under the treaty. And this was an interesting thing I discovered too, is apparently liability insurers, so the ones that insure the shells of the world, insures the nestlings of the world, may in fact be open to listening to these kind of discussions. So if you identify something that Shell is doing, it could expose them to liability. When you go up and talk with their insurers, and insurers say, well, this is your activity, we're insuring it, and if you're going to continue that, then the premiums are going to go tenfold or hundredfold. And apparently there's been some success in that. These are just new ideas, by the way, so just to try to trigger things, and I can't give you a specific example. And then I guess quite a bit has been done in the labeling issue, when people are labeling things that, false advertising, those are just brought under sort of normal little suits. So let me finish the prepared portion, and my last quiz of the day, I think, if I remember my slides correctly. And the bag of Toblerone, 125 pieces, minus the ones that were taken when we passed them around, fresh from Switzerland, goes to the person as to the analogy that I'm going to draw with this particular slide.
It's a football or something.
No. Too many people.
I love football, but unfortunately that's not it.
Flying saucers.
Okay, I'll give you a hint. Well, actually, there's no kiwis in here, are there?
Sorry.
Kiwis. No. Kiwis.
Kiwis.
No, New Zealanders. Any Australians?
Of course there is.
Yeah, so you get the first go. I have to admit that artwork is not one of my, not the All Black.
No idea.
Okay, this is a farmer's field. From above.
Some motor,
Huh? The white are sheep, yes.
and this is it.
And the blue is the gate, and the black is the sheepdog. And if you put this into context of what I've been discussing, the blue is corporate nirvana. The white sheep are our companies, and the one lonely little black dot is at the end, is us, the sheepdog, trying to move the sheep into the goal, or into the next one. So there's two ways to do it. The first way is to single out a sheep and try to chase him to the gate to get out. But what does that normally cause? That normally causes all the other sheep to run to the other corners and avoid it being moved in the way that they want to be moved anyway. But if you do like a good sheepdog does, and you bite at their heels and bark at their heels, don't have to bite, you just have to nip and bark and make a lot of noise, and sort of you can move the whole group collectively to where you want them to be. So I know that's not a satisfactory answer to people that want immediate answers to immediate problems, but I do think it's worth bearing in mind that if we work together and we keep sort of nipping at the heels of the companies, that at some point in time, we may get enough of them to where they need to be, that they can make a significant difference. Okay, I think that's it on this slide. So, discussion.
Maybe a comment.
So, questions or comments? Other ideas?
Question and comment. Maybe from time to time you would have to bite because or the ship would know. That was the first comment. Maybe, and can we have your presentation or something that resumes the information there is?
Yes, I can. It wouldn't give me a part. I'll just email
Or
it to you unless there's
well,
someplace.
And also too, that what we've been told is that all presentations given in all sessions are going to be uploaded,
On
and
the-
I
on the
have the
website.
website.
Okay.
Okay.
And in
I
any
will write
case,
it up
if you
there.
don't get it, I have everyone's email.
Yeah.
Right, if you registered, I have it, and
In any case, they are uploaded.
Okay.
I wanted to find out, you listed a number of voluntary corporate initiatives, but I wanted to find out to what extent can we rely on this? That's voluntary, and the enforcement there.
Yes. Well, I think at least a lot of the U.S. companies, I'm sure the Canadian companies are the same. I think the German companies are the same. The English companies are the same. You know, when they sign